Gormagalas, Karen Corda, and Minister, you're very welcome to the House to discuss this important debate on organised crime. Unfortunately for too many people, when a murder happens, it's just something they see on the news, and there isn't really the horror or disgust that should actually happen when somebody's life is lost in a particular location or a particular address. It's something that people might raise their eyebrows to. They might see it on the news and they move on. But if you live or work or care about a community where a murder takes place, the consequences are devastating. I mean, the idea that a child going to school should get used to Garda tape being around a murder scene would fill any of us with horror. And far too many of our children in many of our constituencies get used to going to school, passing by a scene of a murder. And what happens after that is that there are teachers in schools and community workers and youth workers who have to deal with the consequences of that murder. The relatives who are justifiably upset, the funeral, the tension around that, the psychological impact it has on the entire community. And then, of course, the feeling is, why is this perceived to be so normal? Where is the outrage from wider society that somebody has just been shot dead in my area? And then sometimes it's at the heart of a feud. And many of us have worked through those scenarios. I remember being a school teacher when there was a murderous feud going on in the area in which I was proud to serve as a teacher and also as a local representative, and there's 24-hour armed Gardaí on the street. And you begin to wonder, why is this perceived to be normal or permissible? And why anywhere else in the country that this just wouldn't be allowed to happen? It just wouldn't be allowed to happen. And then, as has been said, this term of gangland is almost acceptable. It's almost common usage. And when it does then, it actually just, it's a victim-blaming approach. It's like, this is what they do. Sure, they're only killing each other. Their lives just aren't as important. Because if such a murder takes place or a killing takes place in an area that we might describe as gangland, well then that's just not as important as anywhere else in the state. And I know what it's like to go to those funerals. I know what it's like to deal with those children who have to deal with the after effects of losing somebody that they love to violence. If you lose somebody that you love to violence, well, it's not something that you ever can really get over. Why is it that so many people are attracted to this lifestyle? We can all come in here and make speeches about Garda numbers and more law and more justice measures. But why is it that so many young people in particular, and so many young men in particular, are just so eager to take the place of somebody who's just been shot dead? Because it's lucrative, because it's glamorous. You don't need a qualification to enter into the business, and you get respect. Now, far too many people in these communities don't get respect. They don't get respect. They don't feel respect from society, from media, from politics, from the guards, from teaching profession. They don't feel fundamentally that they are equal, that they are respected, that if they try to maximize their potential in the mainstream economy and mainstream society, that they'll get as far. And the stats will probably show that they're right. Meanwhile, there's a parallel economy that doesn't ask for qualifications, doesn't ask for entry criteria, offers you easy money, glamour, might even hand you a gun. Might even hand you a gun. Let me give you a few stats, Minister, and I'm glad you mentioned education. 2 3-year-olds. Anybody who's heard me speak before will always hear me speak about 2 3-year-olds. Hart and Risley Report, 1995. 3-year-old from disadvantaged background, 400 words in their vocabulary. 3-year-old from a more advantaged background, 1,200 words. 2 3-year-olds. One has 400 words, one has 1,200 words. You expect the education system to be able to lift this child to the ability level of this child. And the experience of them in that education system is going to have the same results. Of course it won't. And what fills the gap for this 3-year-old if we're not careful? What fills the gap? Well, the empowerment that this parallel economy is going to give that child, potentially. In America, where they've commercialized the prison system, they can predict from a very cold, capitalistic viewpoint how many cells, what capacity they'll need in 15 years' time. You know how they calculate it? They look at the literacy rates of 10-year-olds. In any jurisdiction where they have privatized the prison service, they know by looking at the literacy rates of 10-year-olds pretty much how many cells, what prison capacity they're going to need in 15 years' time. That's what they do. So this is the breeding ground for organized crime. So we can put a guard on every corner. We can introduce every piece of legislation. We can talk tough in these houses. But as long as we have this level of educational disadvantage, as long as we have this level of discrimination, I might call it, we are still providing a breeding ground for this life because it is so lucrative, because it is so empowering, because you get respect from it. Our prisons are full of people who got involved in it for one reason or another. We had 1,000 prisoners about 40 years ago. We have 4,000 now. The reason, the difference, drug crime in the main. Now, in fairness to this government, you have initiated a citizens' assembly on drugs. But we're going to have to be honest about how we can properly tackle the drug issue. Rather than criminalizing those who are the victims of it, we have to spend more time targeting those who are running the show. 70% of the drug cases in our courts are for possession for personal use. You go down to the drug court minister, you'll see a bunch of sick, poor people sitting in a courtroom who don't need to be there. And I feel there is a movement and a momentum now with all political parties in the House to recognise that we have to decriminalise the drug user and focus our attention elsewhere when it comes to drug crime. But yes, we do have to equip the guards. We do have to give them more resources. We also have to give guards more respect. They have to have the basic ability to live, to sustain their livelihoods, to live in Dublin. We have 650 less members of the Gardaí than we had 3 years ago. We have to listen to what they're saying. And we also have to equip community Gardaí, which far too often communities will say, the community Garda section, you know, he was doing so well or she was doing so well. I had such respect for her, I had such respect for him, but they're gone now. They've gone up the chain. I think we have to recalibrate what community Garda service actually is and to give it the resources and the respect and the status that it deserves in the Garda Síochána. So, Minister, I'll reiterate my call. You know, if we continue to demonise areas and call them gangland, if we demonise people who are, you know, the victims of drug addiction and call them names, if we provide no respect for those young people. And I used to hear it all the time. It was fascinating to me, really, in a perverse sense, that when I was teaching these children, I realised that the only time they heard anybody on the radio speaking the way that they speak was when somebody was perceived to be stupid or untrustworthy. It was remarkable. The only time they heard somebody with an accent like theirs was when somebody with an ad was perceived to be stupid or untrustworthy. And they feel this and they know this. I remember an 8-year-old saying to me at Mother's Day, she was making a Mother's Day card, and she wrote to Mum on her Mother's Day card. And I said to the child, why have you written down to Mum? What do you call your mother? And she said, me Ma. And I said, why do you have Mum on your card? And she said, because Ma is awful common. And she was 8. And she knew that what she was and the word that she used to describe her mother wasn't good enough. And we've all created this society to convince this child that she isn't good enough. And the word that she uses to describe her mother isn't good enough. And she was 8. So where is she or others going to get this respect if we don't respect her? From the education system, from her schooling, from her opportunities, because otherwise they will find respect elsewhere. So I'm glad, Minister, during the contributions from the government ministers, there was an emphasis on diversion. There was an emphasis on education. We have to have a fully rounded debate because it can't reduce itself to more law, to more law and order, to more guards. Go on.